I never thought silence could hurt this much. It's strange, isn't it? How quiet can be louder than words, sharper than arguments, and heavier than any goodbye. You raise a boy with your own two hands, teach him to walk, to talk, to dream. And one day he grows into a man who forgets the sound of your voice. That kind of silence doesn't just echo. It bruises the soul. My name's George Miller, and I'm 58 years old. Born and raised in Austin, Texas, I've spent most of my life working with my hands, building homes, fixing roofs, pouring foundations for other people's dreams. I used to run a small construction company. Nothing big, nothing fancy, but honest work. Back then, men still kept their word. Loyalty meant something. A handshake could seal a deal, and a promise was as strong as concrete. But times change. People change. Even the ones you love most. My boy Ethan was my pride once. My reason for getting up before dawn and coming home after dark. When his mother passed away, I did my best to fill both roles, father and mother, holding our small world together with late-night dinners and quiet talks on the porch. I still remember the way he'd look up to me, his little hands covered in dirt, saying, "I'm gonna build houses just like you, Dad." I believed him. Maybe that's why it hurts so much now. 7 years. That's how long it's been since Ethan last came home. Not a visit, not a call, not even a text on my birthday. I tried reaching out a few times, but every message was met with the same cold wall of silence. Somewhere along the way, my son decided I was part of a past he didn't want anymore. He'd made it big in the city. One of those sharp-suited real estate guys who talk about market value and property portfolios. He started dressing in silk ties, driving sleek cars, shaking hands with the kind of people who don't know the smell of sawdust or the weight of a hard day's work. Meanwhile, I stayed where I always was and in my little cabin on the edge of town. It's not much, but it's home. A place built by my own hands, filled with the quiet memories of a life once shared. My dog Max keeps me company. Some evenings I sit out on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the hills, wondering if Ethan ever looks back, if he remembers the man who taught him how to ride a bike, or the night I stayed up fixing his school project because he fell asleep crying. But life has a funny way of turning things around. Sometimes it waits until you've given up hope, and then it throws you into a moment that changes everything. Not because you planned it, but because fate has its own cruel sense of timing. That moment came one quiet afternoon. I was in my yard fixing the old fence when a black SUV pulled up at the mansion next door. The place had been empty for years, a grand estate that once belonged to some oil tycoon. It had stood there like a ghost, towering over my little cabin, the paint peeling from its columns, the windows dark and lifeless. But now it was alive again. Workers were unloading boxes, landscapers trimming the hedges, and someone was giving orders. Someone who looked strangely familiar. I squinted against the sun, and my heart almost stopped. It was Ethan, my son, the same boy who hadn't looked me in the eye in 7 years, standing there in a tailored suit, barking directions like he owned the world. He didn't see me at first. He was too busy showing off, talking to some investors, laughing in that smooth, confident way I barely recognized. But then, as he turned toward the gate, his eyes met mine. For a moment he froze. Just a flicker, like he'd seen a ghost from a life he'd buried long ago. He forced a smile, that polite kind people give to strangers, and gave a small nod. I nodded back, no words. Just that same silence that had stretched between us for years. But here's where life's irony hits hardest. The mansion next door, the one he was showing off, the one he thought belonged to his firm's wealthy client. It was mine. Paid for quietly, in full years ago. Built from the savings of a lifetime of labor and sacrifice. My name, not his, was on the deed. And that day, when Ethan's pride finally came face to face with my truth, the world shifted. Because what he didn't know was that behind the man he once called just a simple old builder stood the real owner of the very dream he was selling. That was the day everything began to change, not just for him, but for both of us. The day my silence finally spoke louder than his words. The day my son discovered who really owned the mansion next door. You see, when Ethan left for college, I told myself it was just the natural course of things, that every parent eventually has to loosen their grip, let their child chase a future, and trust that love will bring them home again. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that the distance between us was measured in miles, not in hearts. But I was wrong. The distance wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, a quiet drift that turned into a chasm over time. At first, he called every few weeks. We'd talk about his classes, his professors, his friends in the city. He sounded excited, full of life, the way a young man should. I was proud of him. I really was. I remember sending him small care packages, socks, snacks, a handwritten note now and then, the kind of small gestures that fathers think matter. He never mentioned them much, but I thought maybe that was just how boys his age were, too busy living to say thank you. But then, the calls slowed. The messages stopped. He'd visit his mother when he came home on holidays, but he'd find some reason to avoid me. Dad's busy, or I'll catch him next time. It became obvious, painfully so, that I wasn't part of his world anymore. I'd see photos of him on social media, smiling in suits, standing in front of sleek cars and glass offices, traveling to cities I'd only ever seen on TV. He'd post about his career wins, his lifestyle, his circle of polished friends. But not once did he mention where he came from. And then came the day that truly split something open in me. We were at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those neighborhood get-togethers. Ethan was there, talking to a few guests, all city people like him. I overheard him laughing as he said, "My dad's an old-school construction guy, not really successful enough to understand modern life." He said it casually, without malice, as if it were just a fact. But to me, it felt like someone had taken a chisel to my chest. That moment didn't just hurt, it hollowed me. Not because I needed his praise or his approval. I'd lived long enough to know that pride fades faster than respect. What broke me was realizing I'd raised a man who measured worth in possessions, not in principles, a man who saw humility as weakness, and hard work as something to rise above rather than stand upon. I had built everything in my life with sweat and truth, and yet, in his eyes, that wasn't enough. After his mother passed away, the silence between us grew heavier. She had always been the bridge, soft-spoken, gentle, the one who could make him see reason when pride got in the way. Without her, it felt like both of us were standing on opposite sides of a river, waiting for the other to build a bridge. I tried, God knows I did. I called him on holidays, sent letters, real ones, written with my shaky handwriting on paper that probably smelled of sawdust and coffee. That Christmas, I invited him home. Told him I'd made his favorite pie, the one his mother used to bake. He said he was too busy. On his birthday, I mailed him a card, simple, heartfelt, with an old photograph tucked inside. It was of him as a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing beside me in the backyard, our hands covered in grease as we finished building his first toy car. We looked happy, and not rich, not fancy, but happy. He never replied, no text, no call. Not even a polite thanks. After that, something inside me finally went quiet. I stopped reaching out. Not out of anger, but out of acceptance. You can't force someone to see your worth if their eyes are fixed on the glitter of the world. So I turned back to what I knew best, work. Honest, quiet work. I poured my time into fixing what was broken. Not people, but things. Houses that were falling apart, barns that had seen better days, porches that needed a touch of care. I found peace in that. There's something healing about taking what's cracked and making it whole again. Maybe because I couldn't do that with my son, I did it with wood, nails, and stone. Then one morning, out of nowhere, I got a call. A voice on the other end introduced himself as a property investor from Dallas. He said he'd heard about my craftsmanship, how I restored homes with care, not shortcuts. He told me he had a big project, the kind that doesn't come around often. A historic property just outside town, known to the locals as the Ridgeview Estate. It was legendary in its own way. An old mansion that once belonged to a wealthy banker who'd gone bankrupt decades ago. The place had fallen into ruin, its windows shattered, its garden wild and overgrown. The investor wanted me to lead the full renovation, from the foundation up. It was the kind of opportunity most men my age would dream about, a chance to leave something lasting behind. I took the job. Not for fame, not for money, but for purpose. For the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to build something that would outlive disappointment. For months I worked day and night, restoring the beams, repairing the staircase, polishing the marble floors until they shone like memory itself. And when the job was done, something strange happened. The investor, impressed by my dedication, decided to back out of selling it, and offered me the chance to buy it at a fraction of its worth. I didn't think twice. I put every dollar I had, savings, old accounts, even the money I'd set aside for retirement, and I bought it. Every nail, every brick, every inch of that estate was mine. I remember the first night I slept there. The house was quiet but not empty. It had a heartbeat, one I'd built with my own hands. It felt poetic somehow that after years of loss, I found peace in walls that had once belonged to someone else's downfall. And here's the twist life loves to play. That mansion, the Ridgeview estate, stood right next door to a newly built villa that was being advertised to elite buyers. It was luxurious, modern, and breathtaking, the kind of property a man like Ethan would die to own. And as fate would have it, that villa was exactly the one my son was planning to buy. Two worlds side by side, his of pride, mine of perseverance, separated by a fence and years of silence. Neither of us knew it yet, but that distance was about to collapse in ways neither of us could have imagined. When Ethan first came to see the property, I had no idea. It was one of those soft golden afternoons when the sun seems to linger on everything it touches. The kind of day that fools you into believing life might still have gentleness left in it. I was out back, wearing my old jeans and scuffed boots, trimming the hedges near the fence that separated my land from the new villa being developed next door. The hum of the trimmer, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the quiet rhythm of work, that was my peace. My kind of music. But then, through the steady buzz, I heard laughter, loud, confident, a voice that tugged at something buried deep in my memory. I froze, my heart stuttered in my chest. It couldn't be, could it? And then I heard it again, that same familiar tone filled with that easy arrogance I once mistook for ambition. It was Ethan, my son. My boy who had once followed me around with a toy hammer and called himself Dad's little builder. Now, his voice had the polished ring of someone who thought he owned the world. I stayed still, hidden by the hedge. There was another voice, lighter, melodic, a woman's. She laughed, a kind of tinkling sound that didn't have warmth, just polish. I peeked through the leaves and saw them. Ethan, tall and self-assured in a tailored navy blazer. And beside him, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine cover. Her name, I would soon learn, was Sophie, his fiancée. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads and the kind of expression that warned you not to speak unless spoken to. They were standing near the edge of their property, right on the other side of my fence. Ethan was gesturing toward the villa's grand balcony, his voice full of pride. "This one's perfect, babe," he said, his arm sweeping across the air as if he already owned it. "Just look at the view. We'll host dinners out here, have friends over. It's got everything, privacy, class, location." Sophie tilted her head, eyeing the surroundings like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Then she pointed toward my side, toward the garden I'd spent years tending. "Who lives next door?" she asked, her tone dripping with that effortless superiority people wear when they think they're above the world. Ethan chuckled. That same low, practiced laugh I remembered from his college days, when he learned how to sound charming instead of genuine. "I heard the guy next door is just some old handyman. We'll hardly see him." "Old handyman?" The words hit me like a nail driven straight through the chest. My own son, the boy I'd raised, fed, clothed, and taught to build, standing there, not 20 feet away, describing me as if I were a stranger, a nobody. He didn't even look up, didn't glance toward the man on the other side of the fence trimming the hedges, the man who gave him everything he once had, and the cruelest part. I didn't even blame him, not right away, because deep down I knew this was the man the world had taught him to become. One that valued money over meaning, image over integrity. Sophie laughed, brushing a hand through her perfect hair. "As long as the neighbors don't bring the neighborhood down," she said with that smirk people give when they believe they're untouchable. Her voice sliced through the quiet air like glass. I could have spoken then. I could have called out his name, let him see my face, let the truth crash down right there in front of his polished pride. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, and just faintly, just enough for myself. Because over the years, I'd learned something important. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it just needs patience. The kind that simmers slowly like steel being forged. Quiet, controlled, inevitable. So I kept trimming the hedge. The rhythmic snip of the shears was the only sound between us. He didn't notice. Why would he? To him, I was invisible, an old handyman maintaining someone else's yard. When they finally left, driving away in that glossy black SUV, I stood there a long time, staring at the fence that divided us. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was years of pride, misunderstanding, and silence turned solid. A wall that had been growing between us long before it took physical form. That night I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, the dog curled up beside me. The moonlight stretched across the Ridgeview estate, casting shadows that looked like memories. I thought about all the times I'd tried to reach out, all the moments I'd swallowed my hurt, all the words I never said because I wanted to protect his ego more than my own heart. But seeing him there, confident, dismissive, so sure of his place in a world that had no room for humility, something shifted in me. Not anger, not hatred, but a quiet, deliberate resolve. For years I'd built things for other people. I'd restored homes, mended what was broken, rebuilt what others had abandoned. But this was different. This was a fracture that couldn't be fixed with wood and nails. It would take truth. Cold, undeniable truth. I didn't know how or when, but deep inside I knew that someday soon, he'd learn who that old handyman really was. And when that moment came, when pride finally met its own reflection, I wouldn't need to raise my voice, or argue, or remind him of the past. The truth would do all of that for me, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of justice waiting its turn. 2 weeks passed after that day in the garden, 2 long, quiet weeks where I said nothing, did nothing, just went about my days as though life was the same. But beneath the calm, something heavy was stirring. I knew it was only a matter of time before fate would draw a line between truth and pretense. I didn't go looking for confrontation, I never did, but sometimes life doesn't ask what you're ready for. It just delivers its lessons in letters. One morning, as I sat at the old oak table by the window, sipping my coffee and going through the mail, I noticed a thick envelope stamped with a silver corporate logo. It was crisp, new, out of place among my usual stack of bills and flyers. I tore it open and scanned the first line. It was from Ethan's firm. They didn't know, of course. They had no idea that the man they were addressing, dear property owner, was the same man Ethan had once called an old handyman. The same man who had taught him how to swing a hammer and fix a leaky pipe. The letter was formal, filled with all the fancy business language that tries to sound polite while hiding greed between its lines. They wanted to buy the Ridgeview estate. The offer was almost insulting. They claimed they were interested in acquiring and remodeling the property to enhance local market value and maintain neighborhood consistency. That's corporate talk for, we think you don't belong here. It was clear as day. They wanted to take what I had built, strip it of the story, the sweat, the soul, and turn it into another polished shell to match the glass and steel arrogance of the villas around it. I almost laughed. My own son's company trying to buy the house I had rebuilt with my bare hands, the house he once dismissed as some old place on the edge of town. For a while, I just stared at the letter, the sunlight glinting off its embossed header. There was a strange satisfaction in it, not anger, but irony. The world has a way of circling back, doesn't it? The boy who once thought his father wasn't successful enough to understand modern life was now unknowingly trying to purchase his father's success. So I decided to reply. Not as a father, not as the man who'd once held his hand across busy streets or stayed up fixing his broken toys. I replied as the owner of Ridgeview Estate. Under my company name, Miller Restoration Holdings, I drafted a letter. It was simple, professional, and polite. No emotion, no hint of recognition, just business. Dear Mr. Ethan Miller, thank you for your firm's interest in acquiring Ridgeview Estate. After careful consideration, the owner has decided not to proceed with the proposed sale. We appreciate your offer and wish you continued success in your ventures. Sincerely, Miller Restoration Holdings. And then at the bottom, I added one line, just one. The owner prefers to keep his home within the family. That was the knife. Subtle, sharp, and deliberate. I mailed it the next morning, and for a few days life returned to silence. The wind whispered through the trees. Max slept at my feet, and I went about my days tending to the estate, repairing, polishing, living. But deep down I knew that letter would set something in motion. And I was right. Exactly a week later, there was a knock at my door. Not the kind of hesitant tap you get from a neighbor or a delivery man. No. This one was hard, impatient, angry. 3 sharp raps that carried the weight of pride wounded by truth. I opened the door. There he was, Ethan. Dressed in another of his immaculate suits, his tie perfectly knotted, his jaw tight with disbelief and frustration. Behind him stood Sophie, dressed elegantly as always, her eyes darting around the property like a hawk sizing up prey. "Dad?" he blurted out, his voice thick with shock. "You own this place?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him. For years I'd wondered what it would feel like to see him again. I thought maybe I'd feel joy or pain or pride. But what I felt standing there on that marble doorstep was calm. The kind that comes when the truth finally decides to show itself. "I do," I said quietly. My tone steady, calm as a river, his eyebrows shot up. "Since when?" I leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow breath. Since the world stopped paying attention to who deserves what. For a moment, he just stood there, blinking as if trying to process what he'd heard. He looked past me, at the grand hallway inside, the polished wood floors, the chandelier glinting above. I could see the disbelief in his eyes. To him, this house was a symbol, something that represented everything he thought he had earned. But now it was mine. Sophie stepped forward, her heels clicking against the driveway. "You bought this?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and judgment, like she couldn't quite believe someone like me could own something like this. I met her gaze. Built it. Restored it. Earned it. Those words seemed to hang in the air between us, heavy, unshakable, final. Ethan's face turned red. Not from embarrassment, but from something deeper, a bruised ego. I could see the storm building behind his eyes. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about everything it represented. To him, this wasn't just a mansion. It was proof that the man he'd outgrown, dismissed and pitied, had quietly surpassed him. He looked around, his voice strained. "You did all this. Alone?" "Yes," I said. "The same way I raised you when your mother was gone. Alone." That silence that followed was deafening. He didn't have a comeback, no clever line or polished smirk. Just that blank, heavy look. The kind that comes when a man realizes he's been looking down on someone standing above him the whole time. Sophie shifted uncomfortably beside him, her eyes darting between us. She wasn't used to this version of me, the calm, firm man who didn't bow or explain himself. "Well," she said finally, forcing a small laugh. "That's impressive, really." But her voice wavered. You could tell she didn't mean it. Ethan clenched his jaw, his pride scraping against reality. "You could have told me," he muttered. I smiled faintly. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew the truth. As he turned to leave, I could feel the weight of everything unspoken between us. The years of silence, the distance, the pride. It all hung there, suspended in the cool evening air. I watched them walk back toward their car. Ethan's shoulders stiff, Sophie's head held high. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel left behind, because in that single moment, without anger or revenge, the truth had spoken louder than a lifetime of silence. He finally saw me, not as an old handyman, not as a forgotten father, but as the man who had quietly built everything he had ever taken for granted. And though he walked away without a word, I knew one thing for certain. That was the day Ethan Miller truly learned who his father was. I didn't want revenge, not the loud, angry kind that makes noise and burns everything down. No, I'd learned long ago that the quiet kind of revenge lasts longer, the kind that doesn't come from bitterness, but from truth. Because sometimes the truth itself is revenge, silent, undeniable, and far more powerful than shouting ever could be. After that confrontation at my doorstep, the air between Ethan and me hung heavy. He hadn't said much when he left, just a few strained words and a look that carried more confusion than anything else. I knew he was shaken, not just because I owned the estate, but because everything he thought he knew about his father, about me, had been turned upside down in one moment. But I didn't want to leave things there, in bitterness or pride. There was something deeper I needed him to see, something no letter, no argument, and no grand gesture could explain. He needed to see me, not as the poor old man he'd imagined, and not even as the successful homeowner he now knew existed, but as the father who had quietly built a life from the ground up, one brick, one memory, one scar at a time. So I decided to invite him and Sophie to dinner. It wasn't planned out like a scheme. It wasn't meant to humiliate him. It was something else. Maybe closure. Maybe justice. Maybe just a father's last attempt to bridge the distance with honesty instead of pride. A week later, I sent an invitation, simple, handwritten. Dinner at Ridgeview, Friday 7 p.m. Bring Sophie. That's all it said. When Friday came, the house was warm with the smell of roasted chicken and herbs. I'd spent the entire day cooking, not because I wanted to impress them, but because food has a way of softening the hardest conversations. I set the table carefully. White plates, a bottle of red wine, soft light from the chandelier overhead. It felt peaceful, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Ethan showed up 20 minutes late, typical of him. He always liked to make an entrance, like time itself could wait. He looked polished as ever. Dark suit, expensive watch, the kind of presence that announces itself before he even says a word. Sophie walked in beside him, every bit the image of high society. Her dress glittered faintly under the light, her perfume filling the air like an expensive secret. "Nice place, Dad," Ethan said, his tone cautious, like he was still trying to figure out how to talk to me. "Glad you could make it," I said simply. Sophie smiled, the kind of smile people give when they're trying too hard to be polite. "What a lovely home," she said, glancing around. "You must have had a great designer." I smiled faintly. "No designer. Just old hands and a bit of patience," she blinked, unsure whether to laugh or compliment me. Ethan cleared his throat. "Shall we sit?" he asked, eager to steer the evening into safer territory. Dinner began with small talk, the kind that feels like walking on eggshells. Sophie did most of the talking, of course. She talked about her world, luxury condos, high-end clients, the latest market trends. Every word was polished, rehearsed, and a little hollow. Ethan chimed in now and then, speaking the same language. Numbers, deals, success. The kind of talk that once would have made me feel small, but not anymore. I just listened, nodding occasionally, letting them fill the air with all that noise about value and prestige and status. When the plates were cleared and the wine glasses half empty, I stood up quietly and excused myself. "I've got something to show you both," I said. I walked over to the old cabinet in the corner of the room. Its hinges creaked softly as I opened it and pulled out a worn brown leather photo album. The edges were frayed, the pages slightly yellowed, the kind of thing time had touched but not destroyed. I placed it on the table and opened the first page. There we were. Ethan, no older than 5, sitting on my shoulders, both of us laughing, his small hands gripping my hair, his mother standing beside us, smiling in the sunlight. I turned another page. Ethan again, this time hammering a nail into a small wooden toy car in the backyard. His face was smeared with dirt, his eyes bright with pride. I could still remember that day, how he'd looked up at me and said, "Dad, I want to build things just like you." Page after page, memory after memory. Birthdays, picnics, Christmas mornings in our old house, the one I built with my own 2 hands. The one his mother had filled with warmth and laughter before the sickness took her away. Sophie's expression shifted as she looked at the photos. She wasn't smiling anymore. The confidence on her face softened into discomfort. Maybe guilt, maybe realization. Ethan stayed quiet. His eyes lingered on the pages, but he couldn't meet mine. I could feel something cracking inside him, not loudly but slowly. The kind of crack pride makes when it starts to break. After a long silence, I spoke. My voice was low, steady. "Son," I said, "I didn't build my life to impress anyone. I built it to last." He looked up then, his eyes uncertain. "The walls you see here," I continued, gesturing around us. "They're not for showing off. They're for remembering what's real. They're built on years of work, of loss, of love. They're built on your mother's laughter, on your small hands helping me in the yard, on the nights I stayed awake wondering if I was doing enough for you." The room went quiet again. Even Sophie didn't speak. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel, each second echoing like a heartbeat. "I used to think success meant big houses and shiny cars," I said, "but then I watched people lose everything chasing those things. What lasts, son, isn't what you show to the world. It's what you carry when the world stops watching. Ethan's eyes glistened. Just barely. He tried to hide it, tried to steady his breath, but I saw it. That flicker of something real breaking through the shell he'd built around himself. He didn't say anything when they left that night. Sophie thanked me politely, her voice quieter than before. Ethan lingered at the door for a moment. Our eyes met, and for the first time in years, he didn't look through me. He looked at me, and in that look, just a second long, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not superiority. Something else, shame maybe, or realization. That night, as I watched their car disappear down the long driveway, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt at peace. Because I knew that no matter how much time had passed or how far apart we'd drifted, Ethan finally saw the truth, that everything he'd been chasing, success, respect, recognition, I had already built quietly, piece by piece without needing anyone's approval. And in that realization, my revenge was complete, not through anger, but through understanding. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is letting the truth speak for itself. A month slipped by after that dinner, quiet, steady, like the calm that lingers after a long storm. The house felt lighter somehow. Maybe it was because I'd finally said what needed to be said, or maybe because the truth had finally found its way out into the open, even if it was only through silence. The days came and went with their simple rhythm. I spent mornings in the garden, trimming the hedges, listening to the soft rustle of leaves. The Ridgeview estate stood still and proud, a symbol of everything I'd fought for, not just in work but in life. Yet sometimes when I paused, I'd look toward the fence, the same one that separated my home from Ethan's, and wonder if he ever looked back. He didn't visit. Not a call, not a message. And yet I knew something had changed that night. You can't look at the truth, really look at it, and walk away unchanged. Then, one morning, just as the fog was lifting from the hills, the phone rang. It was a voice I didn't expect, Mr. Miller. It was Sophie. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the usual polish and poise. There was hesitation in her tone, like she was weighing every word. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She took a small breath before answering. "It's Ethan," she said. "He's not doing well." My heart sank, though I tried not to show it. "What happened?" "He's different lately," she said. Distant. Quiet. I found him sitting in his office last night, all the lights off, just staring at an old photo. He told me he's been lying to everyone. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "He said he's been pretending for years," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "That he told people his father was a failed contractor, that you were someone he was ashamed of." She paused. "He said that lie is eating him alive." For a moment, the air around me felt heavy. I looked around at the walls, at the wooden beams I'd restored with my own hands, and felt something deep. Not anger, not pride, but something closer to sorrow and relief tangled together. "He's realizing the truth now," she continued, "and he doesn't know how to face it." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that holds more emotion than words ever could. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking just slightly. "I wanted to meet you," she said, "privately." Later that afternoon, she came over. She wasn't the same woman who'd strutted into my dining room weeks before, dressed in diamonds and confidence. This time she came in simple clothes, her hair tied back, her expression softer. Human. I offered her tea, and we sat by the large window that overlooked the garden. The autumn light poured in through the glass, gentle and golden, turning the dust in the air into tiny flecks of light. For a while, she didn't speak. Then she looked at me, her eyes thoughtful, almost emotional, and said something I'll never forget. "Mr. Miller," she began slowly, "your son's success isn't what he's proud of anymore. It's you." I didn't respond right away. Her words sank deep, each one landing heavier than the last. I looked out at the trees beyond the window, tall, still timeless. She went on, her voice soft but sure. "He told me he finally understands what real success looks like. It's not about owning things or showing off. It's about building something that lasts, about living with integrity," he said. "You did that." For a long time I said nothing. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. I'd waited years to hear something like that, not out of vanity but out of hope. Hope that somewhere beneath all the distance, pride, and pretense, my son would finally see what truly mattered. When Sophie left, she thanked me quietly, her eyes glistening. "He'll come," she said softly at the door. "He just needs to find the courage." That evening, the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and blue. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the same way I used to when Ethan was little, back when he'd run out to join me, his small hands clutching a toy truck, asking endless questions about the stars. The world had changed since then, but the waiting felt the same. Then just as twilight settled, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights washed across the drive. It was him. Ethan stepped out of the car. No tailored suit this time, no expensive watch, no trace of the arrogance that once followed him like a shadow. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly unkempt, and for the first time in years he looked like my son again. He walked slowly up the path, hesitating before reaching the porch. His voice when he finally spoke was low, raw. "Dad." I stood waiting. "I messed up," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I was too proud. Too stupid to see what you really build." He stopped, eyes glistening. "I thought I had to become someone else to prove I was better than where I came from. But I was wrong. You didn't fail. I did." There was no anger in his voice. Just regret. The kind that comes when a person finally stops running from the truth. I didn't say much. Words didn't feel necessary anymore. Instead, I stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Son, houses can be rebuilt. So can hearts." For a long moment, we just stood there, two men, father and son, bound not by pride, but by something stronger, forgiveness. In that instant, it felt like time folded in on itself, like all the years of silence, hurt, and misunderstanding were being gently mended by something invisible but powerful. The porch light flickered softly above us. The air was cool, the night calm, and for the first time in a long time, there was no distance left between us, only the unspoken understanding that sometimes the hardest walls to rebuild are not made of brick or stone, but of love that's been forgotten and finally found again. Ethan exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve this," I smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But neither did I when your mother forgave me for the things I failed at. We don't earn forgiveness, son. We give it because someone once gave it to us." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. That night, when he left, it wasn't with shame or pride. It was with peace. And as I watched him drive away, I knew something had finally broken through the walls between us. Not anger, not judgment, the truth. And once truth breaks through, nothing, not even years of silence, can hold it back. Time has a way of healing things that words never could. After that night, the one when Ethan came back to me not as a stranger in a suit, but as my son, life began to move differently. Slower, softer, almost as if the world had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. The mansion, once a place that echoed with silence, began to carry the faint hum of laughter again. The wind through the trees sounded lighter, the air itself seemed kinder. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, my heart wasn't heavy with regret anymore. Now every Sunday, without fail, Ethan visits. He pulls up the same gravel driveway that used to separate us, parks his truck beside mine, and steps out with that same quiet smile he used to have as a boy. The one I thought I'd never see again. No pretense, no mask. Just him. He doesn't come empty-handed either. Sometimes he brings groceries. Sometimes a new tool he insists I need, even though I've got 3 of the same in my shed. But most of all, he brings something I thought I'd lost forever. Time. He helps me with repairs around the property, never treating it like a chore. We fix fences together, repaint walls, even rebuild the old wooden swing his mother used to love. There's something peaceful about watching him work beside me. Both of us silent but connected through every nail, every brushstroke, every small shared moment that quietly says, "I'm here now." And then there's her, the little spark that changed everything. Ethan's daughter, Lily. The first time she came over, she was shy, clutching her father's leg, her wide eyes taking in the tall ceilings and echoing halls. "Daddy," she whispered, "who's that man next door?" She didn't remember me, or how could she? I was just a ghost in the family she'd only heard whispers about. But children have a way of seeing truth without being told what it is. It didn't take long before she was laughing, running through the corridors, her tiny footsteps bouncing off the marble floors that once stood in silence. I watched her chase the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, her laughter filling every corner that had once known only emptiness. Now she calls me Grandpa George. The first time she said it, it hit me harder than any apology ever could. I was standing in the garden wiping my hands on a rag after fixing the gate when she came running up, her hair bouncing, her voice bright as morning. Grandpa George. "Look what I found," she shouted, holding up a wildflower she'd plucked from the yard. For a moment I couldn't speak. That simple word, Grandpa, carried with it all the years I thought I'd lost. All the birthdays missed, the hugs never shared, the laughter I'd thought was gone for good. It was as if life had handed me a second chance, not through words or forgiveness, but through the innocent smile of a little girl who didn't know about the mistakes her father and I had made. Every Sunday since, she's made the mansion her playground. She runs down the grand hallway with her doll, her giggles echoing through the house, weaving joy into every inch of it. She sits with me on the porch asking about the stars, about how I built this place all by myself. And when I tell her that it wasn't just me, that it was years of work, pain, and faith, she just nods, not fully understanding but somehow feeling the truth anyway. Ethan often watches her from the doorway, quiet and thoughtful. Sometimes I catch him looking at me, and there's that glimmer of respect. Not the kind that comes from status or wealth, but from recognition. The kind that says, "I finally see you, Dad." We talk more now about his mother, about the past, even about his mistakes, but not with bitterness and with understanding. The walls between us have come down brick by brick, replaced with moments that feel simple but sacred. Sundays have become something to look forward to. The smell of fresh-cut grass, the sound of Lily's laughter, the clink of coffee cups on the porch table. It all feels like a melody I thought I'd forgotten. And sometimes, when the evening comes and they're getting ready to leave, Ethan turns to me before he goes. "You know," he says with a faint smile, "I used to think success was about what you owned. But you built something I couldn't see before." I just smile back. "It's not what you build that matters, son. It's who you build it for." He nods, his eyes soft. "I know that now." As their car drives away down the winding road, the mansion stands quiet again, but it's not an empty silence anymore. It's the kind of stillness that comes after a long journey, when everything finally finds its place. And when I walk back through those grand halls, I see traces of my family everywhere. The muddy footprints of a little girl, the half-finished tools Ethan left in the shed, the photo album open on the table where our story began again. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not money, not land, not even the walls you build. It's the love that survives long enough to be rebuilt. And as I sit on the porch one last time that evening, the sun dipping low beyond the trees, I think to myself, maybe those halls do belong to Lily after all. Because everything I ever built, I built for family, even the ones who forgot me for a while. And maybe, just maybe, that's how forgiveness sounds. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet. Like footsteps returning home. You know, people talk about revenge like it's fire, something that burns, something loud, something you throw back at the world to prove you're still standing. But I've learned that real revenge, the kind that leaves a mark, doesn't need to make noise. It doesn't come from anger or pride or even pain. It comes from patience. I never destroyed my son. I never humiliated him, never shouted to make him understand. I didn't need to. Life has a way of humbling us in its own time. I just lived my truth, quietly, steadily, long enough for him to finally see it. That was enough. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about proving someone wrong in front of the world. It's about letting time do what pride never could. Reveal the truth. The truth about who you are, about what you've built, about how far you've come despite the people who once doubted you. When Ethan turned his back on me, I used to wonder if I'd failed as a father. If all the long nights, the sacrifices, the lessons I tried to teach had gone to waste. There were years when I thought maybe love had limits, that maybe you could only forgive so much before the heart finally ran dry. But then I learned something else. Silence can teach louder than words. You don't have to chase people who've walked away. You don't have to scream your worth to those who refuse to see it. Because the truth, the real truth, always finds its way through. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when the noise of the world dies down and they finally have to sit with themselves, they'll remember. They'll remember what you built when no one was watching. They'll remember the kindness you gave when they gave you distance. They'll remember the dignity you kept when you could have chosen anger. That's the quiet kind of revenge, the kind that doesn't destroy, that restores. So if you're listening to this and someone you love has turned their back on you, don't chase them. Don't beg for their respect. Don't let their silence convince you that you're less. Because respect that has to be demanded was never real to begin with. Instead, work quietly. Build yourself back. Lay one brick, one beam, one moment of courage at a time. Whether it's a business, a home, or just a better version of yourself. Build it strong, build it steady. Not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself that you never needed their approval to begin with. Because one day, maybe years from now, they'll come back. They'll stand at the edge of everything you've built, look at the life you've made, and realize what they walked away from. And when that day comes, you won't need to say a word. You won't need to remind them of what they said or what they did. The truth will already be standing right in front of them, tall, unshaken, undeniable. So don't seek revenge in anger. Seek it in peace, don't fight to be seen. Let your growth be the proof, let your patience be the victory. Because someday, they'll see who owns the mansion next door, and that will be enough.